Hey now, what's going on everybody? This video you're watching is my UFC 193 prediction. I am not predicting the entire pay-per-view and every single fight on it. I'm only talking about the fight I care about and the fight that I want to see and the fight that I will be watching UFC 193 for. That fight is Ronda Rousey defending her championship against Holm in Australia. I believe it's in Melbourne, Australia. They're predicting 70,000 people are going to be there to watch this fight and to watch Ronda Rousey defend her title. Can she stay undefeated? Who really knows? That's what I'm going to talk about right now. I'm going to talk about her fight because I think probably 95% or close to 100% of the people buying this pay-per-view and watching it are probably getting it to see Ronda Rousey fight and to see what happens, to see if she knocks her opponent out in 20 seconds or ends a fight in under a minute. Who really knows what will happen? I'm just positive that a lot of people will be watching UFC 193 for Ronda Rousey. And if you're not watching it for her, then you're just a major MMA fan. And I'm not predicting the whole fight because I don't even know the other fights, because I'm not. I used to be a huge UFC fan, probably 10 years ago, and I was really into it when Brock Lesnar was fighting, and when he would fight, I would buy the pay-per-views. But even before Brock, I was a big fan of UFC. But the last probably 5 years, last 5 to 10 years, have not been a huge UFC fan where I've been keeping up with the sport, and I don't know every single fighter in the sport. I don't know every fighter on the UFC roster. I just don't, because I don't follow UFC that much. I don't follow UFC really much at all, except for big fights. That's the only time I watch it. And I'm not just talking about Ronda Rousey. If there's other big fights with the men fighting and heavyweights fighting, I'll check out the fight and watch it. But I'm just saying, I have not been that much into MMA, and I've not watched many of their pay-per-views this year, but I have seen every Ronda Rousey fight in UFC, so that's why I'm predicting her fight, because I'm a fan of hers. I think she's great. She's the best thing that UFC has got, and they're lucky to have her. So it's Holm, the former professional boxer turned MMA fighter. I don't know how many fights she has had in the MMA or how many fights she's won. I don't know her record in MMA, but Holm, is it Holly Holmes or whatever, or Holly Holm? I don't think there's an S at the end of her name. So Holly Holm is a great challenger, I think, to fight Ronda Rousey. So I think this is going to be a good fight. Entertaining fight. It's always entertaining every single fucking time they close the octagon door. When Ronda Rousey gets in that octagon, they close the door and they're about ready to fight. It's always entertaining, and I'm always pretty hyped up and excited for the fight, because you just do not know what's going to happen in a Ronda Rousey fight. You don't know if it's going to go 30 seconds or 15 seconds or a minute or over a minute or into the second round. You just don't know. That's why you have to watch a Ronda Rousey fight. She is the female Mike Tyson when Tyson was in his fucking prime, knocking people out in under a minute and finishing other fighters. Ronda Rousey is the female Mike Tyson. She's that dominating. She's that dominant. Except she's way better looking than Tyson. And that's a plus. Believe me. So, I don't know how. I'm not going to pretend like I know how this fight is going to end. I think it will end with Ronda Rousey winning. Obviously, I think she's going to win because she's just so goddamn motivated to be the best in the world and the best fighter in the world. In my opinion, Ronda Rousey, what drives her nowadays, I don't think it's victories, and I don't think it's her staying undefeated. I think what drives Ronda Rousey in UFC is to be the greatest UFC champion of all time and to be the greatest MMA fighter of all time. And she's probably the most well-known MMA fighter in the world. If you ask anybody in the world what's MMA or what's UFC, who do you know from the UFC, everybody would probably say Ronda Rousey, and everybody would probably say her name first because she's very, very well known. She's the most famous fighter, definitely, in my opinion, in UFC history. She's been in a lot of movies. She's been in The Expendables, Part 2, and I think Part 3, if they made it Expendables 3, I don't really remember. She's been in Fast and Furious 7, I believe. She was in that. Part 7, she was in the Entourage movie playing herself. So she's already been in like at least 4 movies. So she's already like a movie star and very well known by everybody. By non-MMA fans. They probably know who Ronda Rousey is. But maybe they don't. I don't know. I'm just saying I'm not an MMA expert. I do not follow the sport as much as I used to in the past. So I'm not an expert on predicting MMA fights like I am an expert on predicting pro wrestling. Even though I would not call myself a pro wrestling expert on predicting the outcome of pro wrestling matches, because I'm not 100% at predicting all the matches and pay-per-views that I do predict. I never get every single match right. So I'm definitely no MMA expert on predictions. I just want to say that. How do I predict this fight? I don't really know, as I said, because it could end in the first round. It could end in 20 seconds, but I doubt it will. And the last female, the last chick that fought, the last woman, excuse me, I said chick. I didn't mean it anything against women by saying chick. I just use that word. No disrespect at all to women. I love women. Anyways, I think it was Kat, the last woman that fought Ronda Rousey was Kat Zingano, or however you say your last name. Or that was the other fight. The last fight, I believe, was against Betch Correia in Brazil against Ronda Rousey. And she didn't last very long, and she didn't do very good because Ronda Rousey destroyed her very, 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 very quick. Very quick. And it was in Brazil. And Ronda was defending her title. Her last fight was August 1st, 2015. Of course, she won in 34 seconds, people. 34 seconds. Ronda Rousey basically stood up, did a lot of striking in her stand-up game, was very, very improved, and she looked great. She stood up, punched along with her, and destroyed her and knocked her out. And Betch Correia basically fell flat on her face in the mat in the octagon, on the mat, in the octagon. So Rousey, I'm sure stand-up game going into this fight, this Saturday night, UFC 193, I'm sure her stand-up game is even better. Because I'm sure she's been training her stand-up game and her striking. I'm sure she's been training more and more to get better as a striker. Even though her last fight, she looked very good. Like a goddamn stand-up striking expert because she knocked her ass out in 34 seconds. And that was in Brazil. And then her fight before Brazil was on February 28th of 2015 this year. So this is Ronda's third fight of the year so far. Coming up on November, tomorrow I think is the 13th. So November 13th. Anyways, so it's her third fight in UFC this year. And I think it was Kat Zingano, or however you say her name, took on Ronda in February 2015, and she did something that was very, very stupid that you should never do to Ronda Rousey. She ran at her. I think she was a little too excited because she ran at Ronda Rousey, then it didn't work out, and it was bad. It was very bad because she lost in February of this year. She lost to Ronda in 14 seconds. And then Ronda's last fight. I'm just going through all her fights in UFC, people, to show you the amount of time that Ronda Rousey has finished her opponents in. And then her other fight took place. These are all her UFC fights. July 5th, 2014, Ronda Rousey defeated her opponent in 16 seconds. And then her fight before that, February 22nd, 2014, she won her fight in 1 minute and 6 seconds. And then after that, her fight before that, December 28th, 2013. And as I said, I've seen all her UFC fights. I've seen them all. December 28th, 2013, Ronda won in 58 seconds. And then her fight before that, February 23rd, 2013, Ronda won in 4 minutes and 49 seconds. And then Ronda, before the UFC, she fought 4 times in Strikeforce. Strikeforce was a MMA company. They were around for a little while before, I believe, UFC bought them out or purchased them and took a lot of the Strikeforce talent. UFC got a hold of their contracts and took their contracts over, so that all the Strikeforce fighters, basically a lot of them, went to the UFC to fight in the UFC because obviously the UFC is the number one MMA company around, and if you're an MMA fighter, you want to be in the UFC because that's where you can make the most money for yourself and your family. So as I said, she won 4 times. She fought 4 times in Strikeforce and she won. And then she had 3 other fights before Strikeforce in other probably independent MMA companies. Ronda Rousey fought 3 times and won her fights there. And then she went to Strikeforce, as I said, and won 4 times. Won her 4 fights and was a Strikeforce women's champion. And then she goes to the UFC, and Dana White, before he signed her, he made some stupid, dumbass, ignorant comments, and Dana White said, and if you don't know who Dana White is, he's basically the guy, I think he's a CEO or whatever he does. He's basically the Vince McMahon of the UFC. He runs the UFC, but he's not the owner of it, but he does run it. And he basically controls a lot of the talent's contracts and probably sets up a lot of the MMA fights. So Dana White is running things in UFC, and before he signed Ronda Rousey, he made the dumbass, stupid, ignorant comments that he would never sign a woman, or we would never see women ever fight in the octagon. That he wasn't a fan of women fighting in MMA fights, and we would never see women fight in the UFC. Well, obviously he was dead wrong, because he signed Ronda Rousey, and it was probably the best fucking decision that Dana White ever made, because Ronda Rousey is money for the UFC. She's a huge star, and she is box office straight up money for the UFC. So, and I'm pretty positive Dana White has said in interviews that signing Ronda Rousey was probably the best decision that he's ever made, because it's making his company a ton of money. In this pay-per-view, UFC 193, I predict will probably do very close to 1 million pay-per-view buys or over. That's how many people want to see Ronda Rousey fight. It'll probably be over 1 million pay-per-view buys. Will it get to 2 million? I don't think so. But that's just my prediction. That they'll do over 1 million pay-per-view buys. At least, I think they will. So, again, I'm going to go over Ronda Rousey's past fights in the UFC and how long they lasted. Her first fight, 4 minutes, 49 seconds, her longest fight in the UFC. Next fight, 58 seconds. Her next fight, 1 minute, 6 seconds. Her next fight, 16 seconds. The next fight, 14 seconds. The next fight, and her last fight in August of 15. August 1st, 2015, her last fight, 34 goddamn seconds, and it was over. And she's won, I think, 6 or 7 or maybe 9 of her fights by armbar submission. So she's won a lot of her fights by submission, locking on her armbar, and she is the best at locking on the armbar. But now she doesn't need the armbar, because she has her stand-up and her striking game that is unbelievably good. So I predict Ronda Rousey will win and retain her title, and probably, I'm going to say she's going to win in under 2 rounds. Maybe it won't go out of the first round. I don't know. It might not, but I could see it going out of the first round, because I don't think Holm is going to be stupid, and she better not run and charge Ronda, because that wouldn't be good for her. She'd probably get destroyed if she runs at Ronda. She'll probably get taken out real quick and lose. And if you do something stupid like that and charge Ronda Rousey, it's not going to end good for you. It'll probably end with you leaving the cage with a broken bone, or knocked out cold and getting woken up by doctors after being unconscious from getting up off the octagon mat, because Ronda, if you charge her, she'll knock you out, or she'll probably flip you and lock on the armbar. And it'll be over for you. As I said, I'm a big fan of Ronda Rousey. I will be watching UFC 193. I know 2 other women are fighting on the pay-per-view, I think, for a title. I don't know their names. I forgot their names, but I'm sure it'll be a decent women's fight, because the women usually always bring it in the UFC, and the women always usually have pretty good fights in the UFC, the fights I've seen of women in the UFC. I'm talking about other women that are not Ronda Rousey that I've seen fight in UFC. Their fights have been pretty damn entertaining and pretty good fights. So, as I said, I don't think it will not go to the 3rd round. I just don't see it going to 3 rounds. I think it will end before the 2nd round is over. I think Ronda Rousey will win by submission or knockout. I don't really know. I'm going to just I'm going to just guess and say Ronda Rousey wins in the second round by knockout. Or TKO. Or knockout. Same thing really. Ref will stop the fight. Because in the second round, Ronda Rousey will win by knockout. And the ref will stop the fight. So, Ronda, her MMA record is 12-0. 3 knockouts, 9 submissions. I think she'll be 13-0 after UFC 193. And if you didn't hear, even if Ronda Rousey loses, which I don't see happening, but if she would lose, Ronda Rousey is making, for this fight, here's the number, you'll probably be shocked. I'm not really shocked, but I was surprised when I heard the number and the amount of money she is guaranteed, even if she loses. She's guaranteed this money, and she, in my opinion, she fucking deserves it, because she basically is the UFC, in my opinion. Ronda Rousey, no matter what, win, lose, or draw, which I doubt there'll be a draw, unless the judges are high as fuck, and they would make it a draw. No matter what, Ronda Rousey, get ready for this, she will be making and getting $10 million for this fight at UFC 193. She's guaranteed $10 million. Good for her. She deserves it, in my opinion. She is probably the most recognizable face in MMA, probably history. And in my opinion, she is. If you would see her on TV, you would probably recognize her, or if you saw her in the movies, you would probably say to someone you know, that's Ronda Rousey. She's in the UFC and she fights for a living. So she's very recognizable as a UFC fighter, and just as a star. And there's probably a lot of girls out there, young girls, teenagers, little girls, that probably look up to Ronda Rousey and probably idolize her, and that's great. She's a great role model. She's a great role model to females, that she's showing them all that they can do whatever, they can make big money too, and do whatever they want, and make as much money as the men fighting. And Ronda's probably making, I'm pretty sure she's the main event of UFC 193, so I'm pretty positive that Ronda's probably making more money at UFC 193 than any of the guys are, or even the top UFC fighters under contract. I don't even think are making $10 million. Maybe Conor McGregor is, if that's how you say his name. I'm not really sure, because I don't follow MMA that closely. But I do know who he is. Conor McGregor, I think, is his name. Anyways, I don't think he's making any $10 million a year, or $10 million for one fight. Maybe he's making $5 million, but I would not bet that he makes $10 million for one fight. So Ronda Rousey's probably the highest paid MMA fighter in UFC history for making $10 million for this fight. Holm, Ronda Rousey, this Saturday night, UFC 193. I'm excited for it. I will be watching it and live tweeting it also. I'll be watching it. I'm ordering the pay-per-view. I'm giving my money, my $50, to UFC because I want to see Ronda Rousey fight, because I am a big fan of hers. I hope she wins, and I'm pretty confident that she is going to win. I'm betting on her to win, and I'm pretty sure she will. Ronda Rousey, Holm, this Saturday night at UFC 193. I predict, as I said, Ronda will win before the second round is over by knockout. Anyways, however the fight ends, I predict Ronda Rousey will win and retain her title. Bye for now, everybody. Enjoy UFC 193 if you're watching it, and kick some fucking ass, Ronda Rousey. I love you, girl.